Thanks for joining and welcome. My name is Rich Dale and I'm CEO of Flowlens. Welcome. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to join us. Today's a slight departure for us. We've partnered today with Always Solutions and Gareth Macklin, CEO, today to bring you this webinar and bring a couple of different perspectives from our individual customers. Gareth's going to speak in a second. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Brian McDade of Tobermory and Dennis O'Hara. Brian and Dennis, could you give yourselves a quick introduction, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Richard. Yes, I'm Brian McDade. I'm the data manager at Tobermory Concrete Products. And for those that don't know, Tobermory are a manufacturer and supplier of hard landscaping materials across Ireland and GB.
Yeah, Rich, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Dennis O'Hara. So I'm semi-retired. But I've been around the industry now 40 plus years, and always in manufacturing, working at director level for some very large organisations. NACO Industries being one, Andover Technology, Oxford Instruments being another. But more recently, consultant to smaller businesses, and for the last 2+ years, chairman of Photonic Measurements, based in Lisburn, making smart products to monitor water quality.
Good stuff. Thank you both. Gareth, do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah, well, look, thank you very much and welcome everybody today. And again, thank you both to Dennis and Brian for giving up their time. So again, for those who don't know me, Gareth Macklin, founder and CEO of Always Solutions. Very simply, we are an integrated compliance, safety and training platform. And again, as we've had the luxury work on Rich and the guys for quite a few years. So today's side of things overall for the guests is really to look at, as we've mentioned, sort of surprising yourself with digital across work. And I was reading there recently that a recent McKinsey report had showed that in the first 3 months of COVID last year, that there was more digital innovation than they expected over the previous 7 years. So really from today's side of things is to hear sort of firsthand from people at the forefront of it in terms of sort of the changes they're making within the business, and equally as well some of the learnings and even in some cases the limitations, and really look at sort of between culture, vision, even from an infrastructure side of things, and even those sort of things around organizational changes or a budget and time. So in many cases, many people may think that there's still reasons for holding back from a digitization. Hopefully after they get a bit more involvement and overview from, as I said, the gentleman front and center about the success and lessons that both will help other listeners in on the conversation. So I'll pass back to yourself, Rich, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. So I suppose the first reason is, why start this in the first place? So it'd be good to hear from Brian and then Dennis, what kick-started the digital transformation process. And I should say that we're going to try and keep the conversation here to about 20 minutes or so. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, put them in the chat, and then we can cover those towards the end. But yeah, Brian, you got involved in digital transformation before the pandemic with Obby, as I understand it. So what was the trigger for that?
Rich, I don't think it was so much of a conscious decision for us. Sorry, I'm aware that I'm basking in a heavenly glow here. The sun has decided just to shine in as this begins. So I should have drawn the blinds for that. But no, it wasn't really a conscious decision. I think we had a necessity for simplicity as we were growing. We've doubled our turnover in the last sort of 3 years or so. We were dealing with a lot of very paper-based procedures, particularly within our factories and operations. Just traditional sort of legacy elements from past management, just passed down. So on an average week, we would gather up over 400 sheets worth of data that's recorded out in the factory floor. It just wasn't sustainable as our production capacity started to grow and demand started to grow. We needed some way to to simplify and bring about some efficiencies. And that's what led us to Gareth at Obby. We looked around and there was a solution out there, tailor-made seemingly for ourselves, where we could get quick sort of wins in terms of efficiency of processes, digitizing all of those pre-use checks for forklifts, etc., and maintenance checks, quality checks. Everything that was recorded on paper was moved to an iPad or a tablet, and the benefit of no double entry of data, not passing a sheet on to Jimmy sitting in the office and he would key it on to an Excel sheet, and that sort of real archaic way of working. The admin efficiencies, and then also from management to be able to quickly get visibility of these things in real time, as each check was submitted, was a real draw to us. So I suppose, what made us decide to do this was just a need for simplicity.
Absolutely. We're all overwhelmed these days without having more paperwork to drown us further. And Dennis, from your point of view, what was the trigger for photonic measurements? And again, in previous guises as well, be interesting to know.
I guess it's a similar story, really. I mean, I have had a fair wee bit of experience with systems in the past, so I came to photonics measurements knowing the benefits of having a good system. So encourage the guys to go with it in the very early stages, rather than allowing the company to grow and then get involved in having to migrate a whole pile of data across. And we did grow quite quickly and are still growing. In photonic measurements, we quite quickly acquired business in 40 countries around the world, believe it or not. That takes a fair bit of management, quite a lot of data flying around, and there's just no way you can manage that on spreadsheets or out of a black book. Especially when you're starting to get a wee tiny bit global, you need to have shared data that people can access readily and quickly and manipulate. I was always a big advocate of systems, and then took on the task, and it wasn't a very difficult task of convincing the others around the table at photonic measurements that we should go and jump on this bandwagon quite early on.
That was going to be a follow-up question, actually, Dennis. Around the cultural piece, as a young company, there wasn't a sort of pre-defined way of doing things, I suppose. Were there any objections, or
I think there always are. I mean, I think we're fortunate that we may well have been a young company, but everyone in the company came from somewhere else. So lots of people had seen the benefits of having a system of sorts, an MRP system, an ERP system. So it wasn't a big sale from that point of view, just people came knowing the benefits. I guess the only challenge culturally was in making sure that those in the company were involved in the process of deciding whose system we should go with, rather than just saying, I've got one here already, right? So, I mean, people tend to not like that if you come with one pre-cooked, right? So culturally, we did invite, obviously we went with Flowlens at the end, right? But we invited a number of providers to come to the facility. This was pre-COVID, to demonstrate their system, their wares, what they can do, what it might cost, what the benefits would be, and then allowed the team to make the choice. So that helped the culture quite a bit. The fact that the team chose to stay local and go local, and with a lot of benefits of going local, and sweat it for us. So culturally, it was to allow the team to make the call.
Right, just to extend on that from the point there that Dennis talks about, you've talked very clearly there that from the business perspective, you've had to make changes and the volume of business increasing, and the logic behind saying, look, we need to get rid of paperwork. But from a business that's coming very much like an operational background from my own experience as well, how did you manage that cultural change on the floor, where traditionally you had many, many operators who are doing things, maybe I'm going to call it the traditional way, and then you say, look, tomorrow morning, look, from the company, there is this new way, this better way. Whereas you're bound to have a wide variety of people who have said, well, look, this is the way we're doing it previously, whereas tomorrow morning, this is the new change. And managing that the whole way, what sort of learnings, advice, and those obstacles that you have?
I wouldn't particularly say we had any obstacles. Like, people by their nature, I think, are resistant to change because of a fear of the unknown, but nobody's going to really push back on a smarter way of working or something that's going to make their lives easier in the immediate term or in the long run. So I think for us, culturally, bringing our operational side of the business more in line with how we manage our office or our sales teams, where there is a real attitude or aptitude for continuous improvement. It had very much been seen as two sides of the coin at Tobermoor, where you had your factory operatives and your production plant, and then everybody else that reacted to incoming orders, etc. So culturally, we've put a big drive on not leaving production behind or integrating that and putting it back in their hands, that we are open to change, and we're willing to listen to their inputs to that. I think there has been a tipping point throughout the business where, because of Tobermoor's attitude to continuous improvement, there came that tipping point where people accepted that they would not accept the way things were anymore, the status quo. So people became willing to question the way things had been, which is a relatively new thing for us, but that has very much been confined to our office departments or sort of our sales departments. So bringing that in the production side of things and getting these guys to question the way that things are done was an important stepping stone, so that when we do come to them with an obby or a tablet and say, now you're going to handle your leave requests through this, or if you want to see how many days you've got left, etc., you can get them all from this central data source. Then that's not as much of a shock to them. So that's how we've sort of by tying everything together, we've been able to bridge that a bit.
And just briefly again for both Dennis and Brian, again, I was asked to speak this morning at the Belfast Homecoming event specifically on the green credentials of digitisation down with sort of Belfast Media Group, and there was very definitely an overwhelming feeling within the room and the panel that the benefits of digitisation, coming back to the simple things about even today as a benefit. We're all sitting here remotely, we're not having to necessarily travel to different places. The paper costs, again, Brian, you talked earlier on 400 sheets of paper that are previously. So are you seeing any taking that coming into the sort of organisation where people are being more aware of those sort of things that are an indirect benefit in many cases, but it's very much coming that sort of sustainability and sort of the green credentials that many companies are now pushing forward for? Just maybe from your own side, Dennis, first, and then briefly back to Brian.
Well, I think you mentioned a few of the obvious ones there. Travel, for sure. We have seen less requirement to travel now, and as the information becomes more accurate, etc., and more digitized, you can share that with your customers. There's less need to sit in front of them to try to have to explain everything in great detail. You can send your charts and your graphs, and you can share your data so much easier these days. And that definitely cuts down on travel.
On your side, Brian, maybe coming from the paper side of things?
Well, yeah, obviously it's an environmentally friendlier way of operating. Cutting, I'd say a few trees have devoted their lives to Tobermoor's cause over the years because of the way we've operated. So yeah, that reduction in paper. Similarly, from travel, in terms of people not having to physically be places to carry things such as training, etc., out, because they can do that all remotely. That's a boon, definitely. But even we really focus on marginal gains. So if we can save pennies or seconds, we'll take them because they all add up. Yep. Simple things like a guy not having to drive from one end of our yard to the other and expend that diesel, because we have streamlined a process in that he carries it out. in the office before he leaves, or he's sitting on his forklift and he pulls the tablet out and completes it. You know, all of those are tiny gains that will all add up to a greater good. And yeah, a lot of those are just reductions in time or material resource, the likes of fuel, paper. So definitely it's been a big impact that way.
So you're saying, Brian, not to quote a big retailer, but every little helps.
Yes, and not so few words.
Guys, even if you take there, I mean, a lot of the businesses I would have been involved in not so many years ago would have had old route card travelers and lots of, you know, like basically envelopes filled with paper floating around the shop floor, going from one process to the next process. You know, it just doesn't happen these days.
Yeah, no, totally.
You do it with a tablet, you do it with a computer screen in front of you, and the information is real time and it's live. Unlike a piece of paper, the very first time you produce that and put it out on the shop floors, it could be out of date within the next day, you know.
I think just to reinforce the point that we see companies when they embrace tech like ours, they also begin to think in a more lean, conscious way, because and it's to your point, they're about that continuous improvement and thinking about the process as a whole, not just the little silo that I operate in, and having the team bought into that kind of customer life cycle and that journey, not all the time, but more commonly, then generates a more lean operation, because people are thinking at a higher level. So hopefully that all does do its bit for more sustainable operations.
And Brian, just a bit there, Dennis obviously touched on that conversation about the speed of data and that efficiency. And I know obviously something, particularly from the organization where we work with yourselves, that even during the paper side of things, there's a massive, massive, massive push on the efficiency of data and the correlation of that data and getting stuff out. So coming back to the digitization side of things, how much have you seen an improvement in that sort of speed of data collection to then make better decisions coming out the back of it?
Look, massively. Obviously, we haven't been with yourselves that long. We still see ourselves as at the implementation stage with Obby, but we're already reaping those sort of benefits of the instant nature of, you know, when the submit button is hit, that's it, it's recorded. Whereas we could have been waiting until, you know, 48 hours later when somebody had the time to pop those results onto the spreadsheet, which then in themselves weren't that legible or that, you know, useful to management. So the instant nature of it has sped that up, but it has also brought about, you know, our ability to get out in front of things. If we can see the likes of our quality checks, which are maybe a half early or an early process, if that's happening on that very regular cadence, and things do start to not look the way they should, then they can be acted upon in a timely fashion, as opposed to when somebody's gathered up 8 or 9 sheets worth of checks and popped them onto the system, and then somebody realizes, stop the presses, we need to actually fix something because it's gone wrong, but that was 24 hours ago. So you know, maintaining uptime is another benefit from this. It was a bit of a hidden one for us. So yeah, it goes beyond the, you know, sort of the administrative efficiencies of just digitization.
Yeah, Gareth, if I could just add a wee bit to that. I mean, you mentioned there about what the relative short period during COVID. I mean, things happened during the COVID period that at a much faster rate that would not normally have moved on just as quickly. And certainly one of the areas that I've seen moving on very fast was the remote connection or connectivity with products in the field. So in the service industry, and we're certainly getting into this now, a customer has an issue with a product, and today they will show that to you live over the system, over the screen, and it will be analyzed live over the system and over the screen, and that really speeds up getting that system back up and running again, and cuts out travel and all sorts of stuff. So I've certainly seen that move on leaps and bounds over the last few short years. that remote connectivity to products and to customers.
Can I jump in there, because I think it's important to kind of bring it back to, you know, businesses that are thinking about starting this, and you know, what advice would you give to somebody who's sitting there taking all of this in and wondering, you know, where do I start?
Well, Mitch, maybe if I can start that process, because we were there just maybe over 2.5 years ago. I mean, firstly, the cost of doing this is relatively modest. I mean, you can hire administrators to do all this type of work, but without mentioning the actual figure, the cost from that we pay for our system is probably less than a quarter of what you would pay one admin staff person. So it's a few £100 per month, and you get a lot of system for that. The returns are fantastic. We have certainly seen reductions in our inventory, for example, because we're now able to monitor inventory a lot more. We've seen improvements in on-time delivery because we don't run out of stock as much, because it's all done now live on our new system. All of those things all lead to happier customers, and happier customers come back for more orders. So I would encourage people in small businesses, etc., not to be afraid. This is not a big monster that's going to cost you an absolute fortune. It's relatively modest cost and big returns. And if you go local, as we did, then you get your hand held along the way and help with that implementation.
Yeah, I think to back that up, obviously there's an initial outlay of in terms of cost, but we've seen that as a, you know, in terms of return on investment spread over years. You know, so yes, it may cost time and effort and money to set this up, but I think that the first step is accepting that things could be better and acknowledging that there are things out there that can help. For ourselves, we could have done what, as Dennis says there, and continued to throw administrative people at the problem, but that's not sustainable or scalable. And if we keep growing the way that we're growing, we wouldn't have the space physically for these people. So you know, there came a sort of a road to Damascus moment where we said, not relying on people to solve all of these problems, rely on a system that people can feed into. So if you were to ask me sort of where do you start, I think accepting that there are better ways of working out there is the first thing to admit to yourself.
But if you're saying, chances well to both of you, because, and again, as an operator myself, was something we looked at many years ago, obviously before we started Huawei, is those people within the organization are saying, like, you know, they're still maybe slightly late to the party from the digitization. They're going, you know, digitization, and, you know, we've never done it that way previously, and sure, you know, computers, you know, and all that sort of challenge and maybe lack of understanding. Come back to, again, for those sort of bits where, from your own side of things, and there is obviously challenges in any digital process, as you said there, Brian, you know, there's the early stage where, look, we need to get over the couple of bumps before the digitization becomes the norm. What sort of things would you say to those sort of people that who are still maybe going, oh, I'm not really sure. I hear what you're talking about, but, you know, the traditional way is the way we've always done it. And as you said, Brian, there 5-6 months ago, we don't really like change.
Yeah, look, I suppose if you've ever said to yourself, surely there must be a better way, there usually is. So I think a large part of that's just admitting to yourself that the way that things are going could be improved upon. I think at Tobermore, certainly that's the mindset that runs from the top of the organization to the bottom. You know, nobody's too precious about their own processes, that we could solve a dilemma or a problem this week. It is no less open to scrutiny next week as something that's been sort of, you know, a long running issue for 5 or 6 years in the company. So we've always had that drive from the top down of continuous improvement, and a large part of that was in our processes around paper-based activity. So digitization, as I said at the start, it wasn't really a conscious decision to go down this road. It was just, that's where we naturally went to, and I'm sure that's where hundreds of successful companies naturally go to, because it is the way to go. I don't think you would ever hear of too many saying, yeah, we just made a massive success of sticking at it, doing the exact same thing day in, day out, or adding more and more people to the problem.
Brilliant.
Well,
Final instructions?
I would add a wee bit to that, which is, you know, when you go down the digitization road, certainly with Flowlens as we did, it's modular, right? So you don't have to take the whole lot. You know, it is like eating the elephant. You can choose to do it in small bites. So you can take on a piece of the system and then add to that. And you can just do stock control, or you can do customer services. You can do it in modules. You don't have to necessarily do it all in the one big bite. So you can do it at a pace. And I think that takes some of the fear out of it. And hopefully when you do the first module or two, then you'll get an appetite for it and you'll realize just how good it is. And then you'll start to go a bit quicker.
Right.
Just have a couple of minutes left, guys. So was curious what are your next plans for the future for digital strategy? Where do you see it going next?
Yeah, well, for us at Photonic Measurements, we are now starting to see a lot more requests for service. So some of our revenue is going to start to become from the service side of things. So we're getting into offering extended warranties and upgraded service contracts, etc. So we do need to be able to look after that really, really well and collect all that data and all that information over long periods of years. So that's one route we're going down. We're looking a wee bit heavier. We do a little bit of barcoding, but we're going to do a little bit more on barcoding to take out yet even more transactions and use it more for relieving inventory before we ship, etc. So those are two areas that I would say we're moving more towards for our next steps.
Brian?
Yeah, look, similar to Dennis, we obviously are interested in barcoding down the line as well. Something that we don't do, that it's a standard for those best in practice sort of examples. I think I sort of mentioned earlier, that focus on us integrating all elements of our business and stop this silo of the production operatives, the sales team, the office staff. So we've undertaken we call it our Connect project, which aims to put a tablet in the hands of every floor operative. And that, as I said, that will cover the OBI inputs of pre-use checks and all of the compliance side of things, but everything HR wise, if they need to request time off, they'll do it on there. If they need to communicate with their teams, it'll happen on there. So that's a huge step for us, because a lot of these guys aren't what you would call tech savvy. So we've got a learning and development team that have their work cut out for them, even just getting these guys the know-how of how to carry these things out. But this is, we see ourselves really only at the start of this of a very long journey, and we want to digitize as much as possible, but then automate as much as possible as well down the line. So we're excited to see where it goes.
Fantastic. Gareth, have you any
No, another thing is just obviously we said from everybody home, we'll sort of keep it to sort of 30 minutes maximum. I think just from this side, from us personally, is a massive thank you to both Brian and Dennis for their time today. And obviously again from your side, Rich, and the guys from setting everything up today. So just say very, very much thank you. And obviously if anybody can be of any help in any way front, as I said, reach out at any point.
Cheers, Gareth. Yeah, no, thank you. Just a lot of great points today about, simplicity, bringing the team on the journey, selling the benefits, and having people seeing the benefits from themselves, and how it's going to make their lives easier. that joined up approach as well to the sales and production piece, and the commitment to continuous improvement are, you know, a lot of themes that came out of there. And I like to point as well, I think both of you made it in different ways, about it's like an early warning system. You know, the availability of real-time data allows you to respond faster to situations and more confidently, because you know the data is reliable and you know it's up to date. And, you know, I think that's another major factor that people don't realize, the power of digital tools. So, yep. Dennis, Brian, thank you very much for your insights. Gareth, great to partner with you on this. And unfortunately, I don't have anything on the back of my shirt, so I can't do a big reveal here. But thank you all for your time. Thanks to everyone who has listened today and who will listen back on the recording. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheerio.
Thank you, folks.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.